welcome everybody in person and online. Appreciate you guys coming. Excited to talk today about some of these cybersecurity topics. There are a lot to cover. As you may have heard, a couple of years back, the Department of Labor issued some best practices in cybersecurity. So I'm Cameron Hodson. I've been an audit partner at Larson for several years now, and I lead our SOC audit practice, which is a lot of cybersecurity focus. Also worked a little bit in the 401k space. And we have Diane Nesbitt, awesome partner here as well, that focuses on employee benefit plans. A lot of experience auditing a variety of benefit types. So today we're going to be covering a lot of those best practices. And as plan providers, as plan sponsors, maybe service providers, we're used to dealing with a lot of different types of files, right? Participant files. If you don't have this currently, you can think of those big filing cabinet drawers where you pull out and there's a bunch of participant files in there. So much fun to dig through those, right? So here we hope that cybersecurity is one of those plan files, and it should be the first one there, and it should be something that we weave throughout. So as we talk about what it is that we're putting security in front of, these are the types of data, of money, of proof that we're trying to establish, that we're trying to protect, okay? The types of data that we're protecting: personally identifiable information, some health information, right? Our payroll data, eligibility, all of this is pretty sensitive. We want to have a security guard standing in front of, right? Just like TSA protects us at the airport, our cybersecurity program protects us here in our 401k plans. And the money that moves through the plan. And then a constant theme throughout is no matter how well we're doing, we're not doing it unless we're proving that we're doing it, okay? A very wise man once said, no docky, no doing, which is if you didn't document it, you didn't do it. Okay.
Was that wise man you?
He's not. He's over here.
It was Mark Nichols.
It was Mark Nichols. Credit where credit's due. And overall, compliance is not the finish line. Yes, we're aware of this right now because the Department of Labor has said this is an enforcement priority. So we're a little bit scared this year. I get it. But overall, we should always be protecting our participants. That's our duty as fiduciaries. So instead of reading through these 10 cybersecurity best practices, which are published online, Larson's also issued a series of blogs, and we have a link to those articles as well. We wanted to group them into a couple topics to really help you remember what we talk about today instead of just reading through those. So the theme that I am sensing here of these best practices flows from an overall governance program. Okay, so this is going to have to do with defining our roles, establishing a risk assessment, building out oversight, assigning responsibility, protecting our data. Okay, as we'll talk a little bit about the weeds there. Some of the topics that are very IT heavy, we'll just summarize those. You can go back and talk to your IT department about those. And then recovery. So when we do have incidents, not if, but when, what do we do about that, both proactively and reactively? And then, as I mentioned, this overall theme, how we're proving that we did what we said we did. Okay, we will have a break. It's a little past halfway through. Feel free to ask questions as we go. We'll also have a couple polling questions, okay, for those online. Be watching for that. And here's our first poll. So Allison's going to launch that for us. So the question is, where do you think cybersecurity lives in your organization? And for those in the room, let's see if I can pull that over for you. Did you launch that, Allison? Okay.
Reminder for those online, if you are
I'm
looking to
launching it,
get
Allison.
CPE or CE credit for those online, just make sure you respond to the polling questions, and that's how we can make sure we get you CE for those online.
So that should be launched. For those of you online, feel free to respond here in the room if you kind of just want to think about where do you feel cybersecurity lives? Is it a program, like a paper program for the plan specifically? Is it part of like a broader, your entire company? Is it something that your third-party administrators have responsibility for? Or do you feel like it's a shared responsibility? Maybe it's not formally documented, or you're not sure. Okay, let's see. Results.
Oh, you're not giving away the answer?
If that pops up for us. Okay. So most people are saying responsibility is shared. Okay, some of us are saying, hey, quite a bit of this responsibility does belong to third-party administrators. We'll talk about this more as we go through the presentation. So I'm not going to necessarily say there's one right answer here, but keep listening and we'll see how you feel at the end of the presentation. Okay. That's how we're going to do this. Okay. So if you were to go online to that DOL list of top 10 best practices, here's how they would kind of fit into that govern, protect, recover, prove model here. So as we go into governance, we are going to talk about some aspects of our formal program, our risk assessment, defining our roles. I think I mentioned most of these topics already, so you can just see how they fit through here. Access and data is part of the protect, securing our systems. SDLC, when we get there, there'll be pretty high level software development. Some of you may be designing your own homemade programs. A lot of you may be purchasing those from other providers. That's okay. We talked about recovery, vendor oversight. So some of you in this room probably consider yourselves a vendor to employee benefit plan. But even if that's true, you have downstream vendors, right? And as a sponsor too, you want to be thinking about the vendors of your vendors. We'll talk about that when we get there as well. And then prove, we've mentioned that's going to be an overarching theme. So what are our roles as a plan sponsor versus a third-party administrator? And what questions are we asking ourselves as we start to explain what is this governance? How do we start to think about our cybersecurity program? Both parties in this situation here, both the plan sponsor and third-party service providers, ask yourselves, what controls do you operate? What are the flavors of security controls that you have in place? We'll get into some more details of that, but just be thinking, all right, I know for sure we're protecting client data when it gets sent to us, right? Or when a participant initiates a transaction. How am I protecting that? Authenticating people. For a plan sponsor, what have you outsourced? And just because you've outsourced it does not mean you no longer have responsibility for it. Very important. How do we monitor our providers? So again, a function of outsourcing is continuing to follow up and monitor those providers, not just when we start doing business, but recurring, and what proof we retain. Okay. From a third-party perspective, if you're on the other side of that question, if you have had things outsourced to you, what evidence are you able to provide to that plan sponsor if they ask, hey, we outsourced tracking our participant accounts. Can you quickly provide us evidence that you protected that connection between our system and your system? How do we communicate our limits? So limits of our responsibility is that defined in our contracts. And how quickly are you able to respond to an inquiry? Dan's topic, when we get there, we're going to talk about how fast we might need to respond to some of these Department of Labor inquiry letters. Okay, so we're going to start with data flow as well. It's just a little bit more background as we're getting into this governance topic, and preamble to a risk assessment here is understanding where does data flow in our 401k plan or our benefit plan, no matter the type. So obviously we start with participant data. That's kind of where most of our plan information centers around. Yes, there's also some data around the sponsor itself that's protected and important, but most of our most sensitive data revolves around our participants. Okay, account information, claims history, their personal elections, their identifying information, and it says identity twice in my slide, but trust me, in my notes it says it once, whatever. And then that information is flowing throughout this have the system here. So from participants, they're going to put that in. Usually they're typing it in online or it's through forms, right? It gets sent to sponsor system. So usually like an HRIS system, HR information system, maybe through payroll reporting or payroll files. Sometimes via email. We really can't get away from email, and hopefully we've got that tied down just a little bit, what we're sending via email. And maybe some file sharing platforms as well. So data is flowing from participant sponsor systems to our plan providers, a lot of similar types of systems that we're using, types of connection methods between the sponsor and the provider probably. And we use this acronym quite, but TPA, I think we mentioned already, this is third-party administrators. So these are commonly used by our plan sponsors to do the custodial work, to do the participant data file tracking. So very commonly outsourced to our plan providers. And then ultimately that data might end up at a subservice organization. So again, we mentioned that you may be doing business with an ADP, a Fidelity, an Empower, a 401go, and they may be your primary service organization, but they may outsource functions like custodial services or valuation services. And so you should be thinking about those subservice or downstream organizations. All right, so far so good. This is the data that we're talking about. This is how it's flowing through our system. So as we understand what data we're protecting and how it's flowing through our system, we start to get a feeling of where do I need to have protections in place, okay? It's usually whenever data is moving from one place to another, I need to have some kind of a control or protection. Having a formal program is part of our evidence that we're leaving with governance, okay? This should be in a written policy. It needs to have some senior management buy-in and approval. I think we can all get behind that. And it's not just a one-time effort. It should be reviewed pretty regularly, at least annually, I'd recommend. Okay. There's a lot of frameworks out there that can help us with this governance effort. We talked a little bit about SOC already, perhaps. We'll talk a little bit more about that. It's a great framework for data security. ISO, CIS, a lot of acronyms out there. Search out what you feel like is best for your organization. And then defining who's responsible for what. There should be a leader at the top that takes ultimate responsibility. Perhaps it's your Chief Information Security Officer or CISO. Perhaps it's the Chief Executive Officer. Usually that gets delegated to a couple different people. But if it is delegated, make sure you understand if there's an issue at a customer account level, who do they escalate that to? And what evidence gets left behind? We're talking about a trail. We're keeping meeting minutes for these important governance meetings, for example. Okay. Doing good so far? All right. So really the rubber meets the road when we talk about risk assessment. I think this is the beginning of, hey, we've understood now some of the roles that are involved here. We understand what we're protecting. We understand maybe some of the controls we have in our minds. And then we have this formal exercise to say, now that we understand what we're protecting, what are the threats to that data? So, for example, when we're looking at our TSA agents, what threat are they protecting against? Well, they know that people could come through with potentially dangerous and hazardous items, right? So they have the security scanners in place. Same thing with us as 401k providers. We understand some risks that could face our plan include attacks on our data, so malicious cyber attacks. It could include geographical or weather-related risks like hurricanes or other things that would potentially destroy our places of business or where our data is being housed. And as we're thinking about these risks, we're also thinking about like how likely is that to happen? Okay, so I have two examples that I just gave. If you're located on the West Coast, let's say in California, and you've said, hey, there is a potential risk that my place of business slides off into the Pacific Ocean. Okay, Yeah, maybe that's a risk, but is that very likely to happen? No. So are you going to have a specific control in place to mitigate that risk? Probably not. Okay. But if you have identified a risk that's much more likely to happen, like a cyber attack happening, like a phishing attack happening, very high likelihood. We see those every day. So you're probably going to have multiple layers of control for those higher likelihood threats, right? And when we say control, that's any activity that we're doing that prevents something bad from happening, detects something bad that's already happened, or it corrects something that has already, okay? And usually for those high threats, we have a combination of all three. So for the phishing example, we usually have some preventative controls against phishing, right? So we have our email security systems. We usually have some detective mechanisms. You may or may not have heard of intrusion detection systems. That's to detect threats that are already on your machines. And perhaps some corrective systems. So if you click on a phishing link, there are some software programs that can replace that link with the actual link, okay? So layers of controls for our most vulnerable areas. Definitely important as part of the risk assessment. As you map those existing controls to the threats that you've identified, you're probably going to come up with some threats that you do or don't care about. So that's what we talk about: mitigate, transfer, avoid, or accept. Avoid. We don't need to avoid twice. Happened to us again there. So there are some risks that you address by transferring that to someone else. So that's like what you're doing as a plan sponsor when you say, hey, I recognize that there's a risk to keeping data at my place of business, because I have to worry then about environmental controls. I have to worry about security to the physical data itself. So I can transfer that risk by putting my data at a data center or a third-party administrator. Okay. And like I mentioned, we can accept the risk. Like for that risk, we said a small risk that my place of business falls in the Pacific Ocean. We're going to accept that. And then as you map those controls to those threats, you're going to also find some gaps in your control set. Maybe not. Hopefully you've got a good list of controls already in place where you don't have huge gaps. But I think it's a great exercise to still do regularly, because you may see some weak spots. And as you do, making sure that you assign some due dates and some owners for mitigating those weaknesses that you've identified. Quick comment here. We do often see that there is like a broad corporate cybersecurity program, but less common is to have a 401k specific lens to that. So making sure that there's a piece of the cybersecurity program that covers specifically our planned data, that we're talking about that in those meetings. Okay. All right. So we talked about overall governance and risk assessment. That's where we started. And then a pretty big flavor of a lot of these best practices from the Department of Labor have to do with access controls. So one of the main ways that we're preventing against bad people getting into our systems or our employees accidentally releasing sensitive data is through our access controls. 3 places where we take charge of access are for our joiners, our movers, and our leavers. These are our onboarding controls for our joiners, our new hires. Things like making sure that our access that we're provisioning to our new users meets what role that they have. Our movers, this is probably a little more commonly missed when we do our SOC audits, is if someone changes from a front-end customer support role to a back-end development role, they need different types of access. And hopefully, when they get that new access, the old access gets removed, okay? A lot more commonly missed. And even when it is handled appropriately, a lot more commonly not documented, okay? So that's one to watch out for. And then leavers, I think joiners and leavers we typically see, especially as we do our SOC audits and probably our ITGC assessments, people have pretty decent controls over onboarding and termination. Maybe we need to extend a little bit our termination checklist to make sure that we're covering like access removal and that there is a trail in place when someone completes the access removal step. Sometimes we'll see that be missed in terms of documentation. And then make sure that when we mentioned that. Make sure that when we're completing these controls, we are keeping a record of that in our ticketing system. All right. Another poll here. How often does your organization formally review access? You really don't? I'm so sorry.
They show up after.
We should have tested this with you. Like,
Is that you? So we can, your picture?
oh, there we go.
That is my picture. That's a great picture.
That's a great thought.
We want to do it this way.
Yes.
So you can see our fabulous picture.
We'll diagnose that. Okay, so here it is. How often are you reviewing access? Okay, I'll give you another 5 seconds there. Okay, so most people are saying semi-annually or you're not sure. Okay, good thing to go back and figure out, right? If you're not sure, ask your IT department. If that's not part of your process, it could be that they are doing it semi-annually. Maybe you're just not the person that they're coming to talk to about that. But important to review that. Is there a best practice for frequency here? It really depends on your size of organization. So how many people are flowing through this onboarding termination? I often see this flow between quarterly and semi-annually when we're doing our SOC audits. So I don't think I see it any more frequently than quarterly. I'll say that. Okay. Beautiful. So where are we protecting data? So authentication is when we are getting into our systems, what types of methods do we use to say that it's really us that's getting in? So we have controls over making sure our passwords are strong. We'll probably know what this looks like because we've had to create passwords before that have 1,000 characters and symbols and we can never remember them. That is important. And there's a lot of opinions on whether length matters more than complexity. Having a variety of passwords is important. Definitely recommend password manager systems to help us remember so we don't need to remember our passwords. And that way you can have a variety of passwords for your different applications. Single sign-on where practical. A lot of our systems allow for this. Microsoft, Google will all enable us to use single sign-on with a pretty wide variety of applications. And then having a form of multi-factor authentication. Again, we aren't going to get too far into the weeds here, but having some phishing safe multi-factor authentication where possible. So authentication, important part of protecting our data. And then whenever data moves between places, so transmission of data, we want to understand, is that data transfer encrypted? So usually that's true. If you're on a website, you can see if it's HTTPS or HTTP. Almost all websites these days are HTTPS. And then in addition, when you're interacting with the portal, usually there's another form of encryption called TLS in place. And there's a couple versions of that. And again, talk to your IT people for making sure they have this in place. Likely they do. Most organizations have good policies over the transmission method of these things that we've seen. Email we talked about before. It is so hard to get away from making it easy for our customers and our employees to give us data that it's just happens, right? We have employees or our participants down the line that send us information attached to an email. there's not an amazing way to combat that besides like training, right? Making sure that we're at least telling our employees, hey, whenever we're sending or requesting data, it should be through our portal or through some kind of a secure file exchange link that we're sending to people. Avoiding email attachments as much as possible because A, if that's stolen in transit, that's a file that's out there that can be accessed by anybody potentially. Yes, there's some encryption methods on the email themselves, but that also sits in people's email, usually for a long time. And that just exposes you to, again, a little bit more risk of an attacker getting access to someone's email and having lots of attachments they can feed on, but also potential risk for litigation, right? You may have a lot of information in email that would be subject to discovery. And then retention. So how long are we keeping this body of data for? I know there's a big push and pull for we want to have tons of data and we want to have access to it for forever because that's powerful. But at the same time, the more data, the longer we keep it, that's presenting some additional risks with people being able to steal more and also more discovery in the event of litigation. Okay. Off to the side here, we've identified some of the data that we're dealing with that deserves some extra care. You guys are all familiar with those types of data. Again, thinking back to our risk assessment, information that's about like my physical address, maybe not that important to protect, but personally identifiable information, very important to protect and probably have more controls protecting these more sensitive types of data. So where does fraud happen in our organization? It often starts with a small change. So here's the scenario. Ask yourself this question. There's going to be a poll here in a second. Participant changes an email address and a bank account. So that's the scenario. 2 days later, a full balance distribution request appears. So what would happen in your organization in this scenario? So let's see what you think. So would the transaction automatically be stopped? Would you have to additional identity verification? Maybe there's a manual review that would notice it. Oh, the TPA will handle it. Or the transaction would probably be processed, or you're not sure. What do you guys think? Another 5 seconds there. Bolts. Okay, so let's see. We've got a little bit of more variety here in the room. Any of you guys want to answer?
I was going with number 2.
Number
Transactions
2.
should require
Bit more
additional.
Okay. Any other responses in the room? Okay. So online looks like a majority are with you. Additional identity verification, some manual review. Okay, so hopefully, as you're answering that question, you also think to yourself, could this be handled better? Okay. So what should happen in this situation? So would there be some elevated review that happens? Potentially, right? Whenever there's a change made, that might trigger an alert to somebody that's more responsible or somebody that's outside of that participant request chain. We talked about identity verification. So that person that's requesting a change, do they have to at least answer like an SMS? They type in this code in order to prove that it's you making this change. A lot of times I see when a change gets made that is sent back to the participant's email. That's at least something else that's happening that participant would then notice, hey, is this me that made the change, right? Separate duties. So somebody outside the request path Beautiful. So if it's a participant that's initiating that change, does the HR manager then see it? Okay, or if the HR manager is the one initiating the change, does the CEO see it or a different type of executive see it? That is an area where we'll sometimes see some weaknesses in internal controls is changes that the person that regularly puts things into the database makes. So like the HR person, right? So I'm talking about here. So if they're making a change themselves, who reviews changes that an HR manager makes? If you're the HR manager, we trust you completely, but you should have somebody reviewing your work, obviously. And then retain what was checked. Love these.
It's just the display. This is my slides, so.
It's nice.
So, and then overall, the idea is we're trying to introduce friction at the right time. So this transaction doesn't just go through. We all feel a little bit uneasy about this, right? This shouldn't be allowed to happen without any friction. We talked a little bit about SDLC and how we wouldn't talk about it, so I won't belabor this. But if you are building your own in-house system, or if you know that your company has, talk to your IT department about some of these types of flavors of controls. During the build, making sure that you've got some review over what changes are being made. And maybe even if you're not the IT person, if you've been asked to like, hey, we just made this change, will you see if it's working? Maybe you're part of the process that way. If you're choosing to buy a tool, maybe some of you are involved in these buying decisions. So what kind of review are you doing over the third-party provider that you're buying from? And then regular testing of your systems. So that may be something that you see as well. Is do you see those patches regularly pull up like, hey, the system needs to be updated? Do you always click yes when that happens, or do you click wait for later? It's okay, we all do it. And then what kind of regular logging and alerting is happening within those systems? There should be a layer of controls here across this build, buy, test lifecycle. Okay. So fun. Another quick, let's see. You did get it? Well, hang on to that for a second, because I don't think we talked about recovery yet. So after this slide, you can be ready to pull it up. So recovery, so we're starting to talk about these best practices. We've gone from governance and risk assessment, access control. We talked about building our software out. Now we're talking about what do we do when we lose stuff or when something bad happens? What do we do proactively and what do we do when it happens to us? Okay, so business continuity planning, BCP, kind of the overarching resiliency shield, so to speak. So that involves making sure that our operations continue to work in the event of a disaster. That's pretty holistic. So that's like business operations, everybody's involved in that exercise. How do you make sure that if a hurricane hits or if ransomware hits, that your business can keep operating? You can keep selling, you can keep producing widgets, whatever it is you do. Disaster recovery is pretty specific to IT. So your systems themselves, how would they come back online if that happened? So if your data got locked down, what systems do you have in place to then boot up backup copy of that data? Or do you have some other sites that are ready and live, ready to go for your employees to go work at if the primary site got destroyed or whatever happened to it? And then incident response is very narrow. So that's like a specific threat occurs day one, hour one. What do you do to respond immediately in the event of an incident? And these are all potentially 3 different programs or 3 different policies that you have, but a little bit wider and wider stakeholders as we move from incident response to business continuity planning. And with all of these, oh wow, this is teeny tiny text, but what sort of guides like the level of how well you do each of these, recovery time objective is how long does it take you to get back up and running? So if your business is okay without its systems and data for weeks and weeks and weeks, okay, unlikely, then you probably don't need to invest very much in these business continuity planning measures, right? But if you need to be back up and running within half an hour, then you are probably going to spend a lot of money and also have a lot of different variety of preventive controls. You might have a contract with a third-party provider that says, hey, at any point in time, you need to get us another live site up and running for our employees to work at within an hour. And that's something that's, those contracts are out there, but would also be pretty expensive, right? Also, you have data backups that are happening. And another example of this is for AWS is a common hosting provider. You can pay AWS to keep backup copies of your data. You can pay them even more to have that data distributed across their sites across the US. So some geographic redundancy. If that's really important to you, like if you need to have access to that data very quickly, if something happens, again, you're going to be paying a little bit more, but you have that access protected. And then recovery point objective is how much data can you afford to use? And again, same kind of concept. If you can afford to lose lots of data, you probably don't need to worry as much about this. If you can only lose hours, minutes worth of data, then you're going to need to be backing up very regularly. Okay, so resiliency. So Allison, did you want to launch that whole app? Is that working okay? So when did your organization last test recovery specifically for a critical employee benefit plan processor system? Okay, I won't display the results yet. Anybody want to confess?
I have no idea.
Okay, no
I'm
idea.
not sure.
All right. I will make you guys answer this. Oh, Allison, do you want to? I'll do the honors. Okay, not sure. That's okay. You can go back and ask this question. Okay. Within the past year, awesome. We often will see this being done annually because it is a lot of work potentially. Okay, actually demonstrating that you can recover from a system incident involves taking that system down, right? Very much more common we'll see is employees or organizations doing what we call a tabletop exercise, where they'll simulate and at least have the stakeholders in a single room together, like around a table, and say, okay, here's the scenario. We just got attacked with ransomware and we can't access all of our data files. What do you do, John, over IT? What do you do, Nathan, customer support? Who do you have to report to in our legal department? So making sure that people can answer those questions around a table at least simulates what it would be like if our system went down. We should be doing that at least annually. Okay, back here. Awesome. Okay, so the first hour. So we talked a little bit about incident response already. What does incident response look like? That first hour is so important. And these are the types of activities that we're doing right away. So we're detecting what is the problem that occurred. Do some really quick triage. Can we identify exactly what data the attacker got access to? Was it limited to just one employee or one machine or one email account? Or is it a bigger threat? Is it access to a bigger database? Can we contain it? Can we take that machine offline right away? Can we do a little bit of investigation? And as we're investigating, we may feel like, hey, let's get rid of this access completely so it's not affecting us. We want to make sure that we're preserving evidence in case we need to come back in and have some forensic investigation. Communicating, we talked a little bit about who do we need to talk to in our legal department. Some of our contracts do state if an incident happens, you need to report to a participant potentially, or you need to report to the Department of Labor potentially. Recovery, we talked a little bit about. We can start to that recovery process right away with incident response. Maybe there's the IT manager can kick that off right away. And then obviously, as we diagnose what happened, we'll identify what we do to prevent this in the future. So improving. Let's skip this polling question for now. I think we're okay. We've got plenty of polling questions. Vendor oversight. So we're talking about who has responsibility. Some of you guys at the outset said shared responsibility for cybersecurity program. And I think you're right. There is a lot of shared responsibility. Vendors play a role in a lot of different parts of our program, and we should be vetting those vendors both at contract outset with the vendor and also some kind of an annual review of that vendor. So how do we do that unless we are, first of all, keeping track of a list of who our vendors are? So having a vendor inventory, I see a lot of times people will track this in Excel. That's fine. There's also some software systems out there that let us keep track of who our vendors are, who has most recently followed up with that person, what the result of that follow-up was, who collected the SOC report. So some of those diligence steps are things that we can keep in our vendor inventory. I think that we do a pretty good job of these steps when we're engaging with the vendor. We'll collect like a security questionnaire, we'll do a background check, we'll check references. Do we do as good of a job on that annual check? Maybe, maybe not. I think the criticality of the vendor can really play a role too in how much we want to annually review that particular vendor. If the vendor that we're talking about is just cleaning your building, or maybe it's just serving your internet. Okay, I know that's important, but is it a huge part of the system that you're providing to your customers? Maybe, maybe not. So if they are more critical, obviously there's a higher level of review that you're doing over that service provider. Maybe you are annually sending them these questions to answer, or reviewing their security policies and comparing them to your own. Because if you're protecting your data at a very high level, that's great. But if your service organization has a different level of data protection, then it doesn't really matter how great of a job you're doing. And monitoring, I think we talked about pretty sufficiently. So far, so good. Does this make sense? Any questions? Okay. All right. Sounds good. Awesome. So one of the tools we have in our vendor review toolkit are SOC reports. So Diane's going to talk a little bit more about what a SOC report is, and then we'll take a break at that point, right?
Perfect. Thanks, Cameron.
Yeah.
And I'm learning some things right along with you guys because I am not a cybersecurity expert. Really appreciate Cameron sharing his expertise. So one thing I have become a bit more of an expert on are the service organization control audit reports. So when we are engaged to do an employee benefit plan audit, one of the things that we always request is this SOC audit report for your plan record keepers, maybe your plan custodian. There could also be a sub-service organization that is helping the record keeper with IT specifically. So what we find a lot of the times is our plan sponsors know how to get us the SOC audit report, but they don't realize that it's actually their responsibility to read and understand it. And when you've outsourced a service, you did not outsource your fiduciary responsibility. You did not outsource liability, right? So we see this as a blind spot. The Department of Labor has seen this as a blind spot when they've come in and done these, send out these inquiry letters. And then the biggest gap in plan sponsor cyber documentation tends to be around those outsourced service providers. So what we wanted to make sure that we do is give you some tools and takeaways on what exactly should I be doing as a plan sponsor when I know that a vendor, I've outsourced it and they have a service organization control audit. So you need to understand what type the report is. So the most common one we look at is a SOC 1 type 2, which is for a financial statement audit, meaning the vendor is actually processing financial transactions on your behalf. So we need to understand that there also is a SOC 2 that is solely focused on the IT controls. It's not going to focus on financial transaction processing controls specifically. So sometimes your SOC 1 Type 2 loops all that in and you get it all in one spot, which we love because that means it's one less 150-page report that we are required to read as well and evaluate. But sometimes those are segregated into 2 audits. Make sure that the SOC audit that you're looking at covers the period that you're doing your annual review. A lot of times SOC audit reports don't cover just a nice calendar year because it's timing of getting all the work done and getting the SOC audit report to all of us needy auditors who want the SOC audit report. A lot of times the SOC audit will cover, say, January to September of the year, and then they'll produce a letter saying there were no changes coming from the service provider. So make sure it's covering the right period. Again, the scope, is it really covering things that are relevant, that we care about, that we've identified risks that Cameron talked about earlier? Maybe there's a SOC audit report that a vendor gives you, but it's really not addressing any of the focus or the risk that you're trying to make sure you're addressing. Talked a bit about carve-outs, subservice organizations. You need to understand if there are subservices provided, you might need to get a SOC audit from the subservice provider and also review that SOC audit. You want to look at the opinion. You want an unmodified or clean opinion from the SOC auditor. And then specifically, if there are exceptions, because there can be exceptions in the testing, how did the auditor respond to that? And how did the provider respond to those exceptions? And how does it impact? Is there a specific risk now that you feel like your risk is increased because there was an exception in the testing? And then the most important piece is how did you respond to it and documenting that follow-up, that response. So don't just file it away or say I gave it to my financial statement auditor. So the tool that we wanted to give you all, and I'll kind of show this and then we will email this out to everyone. So we just developed a SOC review checklist, and this is in PDF. It's a fillable form PDF, but if you want to go old school and print it out, you can print it out. So it's documenting some of the things we said. You want to make sure you know who the provider is, what the period is, and then it's just going to go through report important areas that you need to just document some basic things on what you did or didn't see. And then at the end, it's going to be, hey, what was the overall effect of the plan? And what does our follow-up need to be? What's the action? Who's responsible for it? When it needs to be done by? And then some documentation saying it was completed and that someone reviewed it. So again, just trying to make sure there's a valuable takeaway. And you're not going to remember everything Cameron said. You're not going to remember everything I said today. But so what we wanted to do is we'll provide this frequently asked questions document that lines up with this. So if there's a question here, like I don't actually remember what that means, or I don't know what that means, we're hoping this frequently asked question document will help connect the dots on what does that mean and what do I need to do with that information. So don't forget about these SOC audit reports, because the Department of Labor, if they send that inquiry letter, this is one of the things they're going to ask you for is what did you do with the SOC audit reports for those vendors that you've outsourced something to? Okay, so I think now with that, we can go ahead and we're planning a 10-minute break. Okay, so those of you online, plan on being back with us at 11 a.m. Mountain. You might be elsewhere, but in about 10 minutes, we'll come back. Thank you.
Good clap. Good job.
Yeah, for sure. And then you can go to the restroom, get another snack.
You guys switch, you gotta turn the camera.
Talking now.
Okay.
Ready to get started.
You're good.
Okay. All right, we are back and ready to get started.
How soon is that?
Appreciate everyone hanging with us. We got some more important things to talk about. So we've talked about that SOC report. And we'll send that handout, but if you have further questions, need some more support, we are happy to help with that. We read them when we do benefit plan audits, and we have a whole team that actually does SOC audits. So we are more than happy to help. Okay, full question. What typically happens when your organization receives a SOC report?
You told me to do that?
I'm gonna let the man that has been doing it use the technology. Thanks, Cameron.
Yep.
Okay. So the question was, what usually happens when your team receives a SOC audit report? Reminder, it's Service Organization Control Report. Sometimes we love our acronyms, and I forget that not everyone loves acronyms as much as we do. Okay. So is there a qualified person reviewing it and documenting their conclusion? Is it reviewed that the review is not formally documented? Is it saved in the vendor file for future reference? We rely on an advisor or consultant to review it. We do not regularly obtain SOC reports, or I am not sure. Okay, give it another 5 seconds or so before we close it. Go ahead and close it. We'll see what people have going on with those vendor subservice organization SOC audit reports. Saved, okay, it's like saved it, okay. We've at least got a copy of it. We can step in the right direction, right? What else do we got on there? Is that our only, oh, it's here. Sorry, yeah, okay. Qualified person reviews and documents the conclusion. Awesome, that is a 3-way tie. That doesn't happen very often. I like it. Okay, so like I say, we'll give you that checklist, and hopefully that'll help do something with it, and then also document what you did with it. Okay, next up, we're going to talk a little bit about training and then, monitoring and continuous improvement will be the next 3 topics we'll cover. Sorry, excuse me. That's what I get for having a snack at the break. Okay, so let's talk about training, which is something that I love and enjoy doing, and also just do really feel like good training can really turn policy into behavior. So what we have shown here is we're talking about who else involved with this plan specifically, and then what are risks, and then what training should each of these parties actually have based on the risks of the plan. So we're talking everyone, and then we're talking benefits and HR specifically, who has regular access to a lot more sensitive, that PII information. Same with payroll and finance. You might have people's bank accounts, right? Because they, and then you've got your IT and your help desk, and then you have fiduciaries, okay? Reminder, with benefit plan audits, just because you've outsourced the service does not mean you've outsourced the liability or the responsibility. Sometimes there are service providers within the employee benefit plan space who will take on some fiduciary responsibility, which is great. Make sure you understand that contract. What are they actually taking responsibility for? So training. Also, another party that's not explicitly listed here up above, but down below is participants. And from what I understand, the Department of Labor, they do have some best practices for the participants themselves to pay attention to, but they also put back on the plan sponsor to say, have you been educating your participants? Have you been training your participants on making sure that they use a passphrase, making sure they change their password regularly? So there also needs to be some participant education and training here. So like I say, making sure you're training specific to the risks that the plan faces, and that training should look different for the different responsibilities of those involved with administering the plan. Okay, so we've done the training. now how do we tell the Department of Labor that we've actually done all these great things, that we've spent time, we've spent money, making sure that we have a formal cybersecurity plan, and that we're doing training. So we need to do monitoring, right? This dashboard will help you focus on the things that you should focus on, but also document what you've done. So this dashboard can be practical. Management doesn't need to log every single event around cybersecurity, but what you do need to keep track of is if there were exceptions to your controls or your processes. If there are responses or actions that are overdue, your dashboard should help you see that easily. Any trend lines, has there been maybe an increase in people accidentally clicking on that phishing email link? And what do you need to do? Do there need to be more training? There need to be another program put into place that just does a better job of scanning emails and blocking those emails completely, or something to that effect. And then any item that requires a decision by a responsible party involved in the process, your dashboard should help you monitor that, help you see that easily. So this will support the continuous improvement cycle. There may be your IT department for the plan sponsor might already have some sort of monitoring solution in the IT department. That's great if they do. Maybe what you need to do is go back to them and say, hey, for that monitoring you're doing, there's things that are specific to either our outsourced plan vendors or things that are very specific to the plan itself. Cameron mentioned this earlier, that a lot of times it's the company itself, the plan sponsor itself does have a cybersecurity program, but they've kind of missed the mark on honing in on the benefit plan specifically. And if this dashboard could be manual, right? Maybe it is an Excel spreadsheet, with a tab for each of these things. But there are software solutions out there for something like this too. So making sure you have a vehicle that can help you see something and make a decision, and that it's documented. Okay. So next, we want to talk about continuous improvement, and basically that there's this loop, right, around cybersecurity, around controls. So talking about training, testing, finding incidents, and near misses should change this program. So make sure that findings, exceptions, incidents, and exercises lead to corrective actions. And then when you do have a corrective action, make sure there's an owner, there's a due date, and that there's follow-up and reporting to the appropriate parties. Does there need to be reporting to legal counsel? Does there need to be reporting to the participants of the plan, right? So what feeds the loop are going to be your exceptions. And then what proves the loop is those corrective actions, follow-ups, responsible parties reporting on that follow-up and what was done. Okay. So, Cameron talked about probably those first 4 or 5 areas. And then I'm reminding us that we need to be tracking, monitoring, documenting. Okay. In this section is what we're trying to focus on. Make sure that you build your evidence file before that Department of Labor inquiry letter comes. Okay. So as best you can, get everything in one place, right? You want to make sure that you're not scrambling when the time comes. So one of the things that we want to talk about is insurance. Okay. So a couple different types of insurance coverages and what they mean to the plan. How do they help the plan? What should they be doing? So first you have your ERISA fidelity bonds. This one's a really common one that people don't really understand. This is a regulatory requirement. If you have an employee benefit plan that is governed by ERISA, you must have this ERISA fidelity bond and coverage in place. In fact, the Department of Labor produces a list of approved providers for this fidelity bond coverage. It shouldn't just be the same company that you might have your officers' errors and omissions policy, your fiduciary liability policy. I have seen it where the provider can do a rider or an add-on to your fiduciary liability policy. But again, the Department of Labor has said that it needs to be a provider that's on the approved list that they put on their website. So that fidelity bond is specific to fraud or dishonesty involving planned funds or property. I get excited about this one because this is one that we actually have this as a written compliance finding in our financial statement audits pretty regularly because people think their fiduciary liability insurance covers it and it does not. So if you're not sure, ask if you have an insurance agent that you work with specifically at your place of business. Also, you probably could ask those plan service providers. They might also recommend you to someone that can help you get that correct ERISA coverage in place. There's also minimum and maximum levels that the Department of Labor has specified for what that dollar amount coverage should be. Okay, and then we don't want to forget about cyber liability. So fiduciary liability insurance, cyber liability insurance, those are optional, not required. So, but best practice recommends you have both. So we're talking about your fiduciary liability if officers steal money from the company, then the company is covered, okay? But cyber liability, this one is talking about incident response, talking about all these regulations, the state level and the federal level. A lot of times there's remuneration, right? For the people whose data has been compromised. We now are all very familiar with it because we get the email all the time that my data with Target was compromised, right? So then we're looking at saying, was a participant of the plan, was their data compromised? And do you have cyber liability that potentially helps address that incident and provide some coverage for the plan sponsor in that case? So understanding what each type of insurance is meant for, what the limitations of each type of insurance are, and then what is the actual coverage. Is it really meeting the needs of those risks that you have out there that you can address to some extent with insurance? Making sure you understand that. And like I say, I know the Department of Labor asked about it because they've now asked us to put it in as a written compliance finding if there isn't coverage in place or correct coverage in place as part of our financial statement audits. Any questions on that? Okay. Love talking about insurance. Okay, along those lines, again, we're talking about building the evidence file before that Department of Labor inquiry letter arrives. So we want to talk about one index repository that turns a scramble into a response process, okay? So we've talked about governance, we've talked about risk and access, our technical resilience, our vendor oversight, our training and monitoring, and our insurance incident. So saying that if you have documentation support and documentation in these 6 areas, you will be much better and more prepared to respond to that Department of Labor inquiry when they come, or another third party, right? It could be that your organization potentially is going to have a service organization control audit, or the IRS or the IRS could come and do an audit. And then for me, my role as a financial statement auditor, we are required to do an internal control, general internal control assessment around the plan financial statements themselves. So if you have a lot of this information ready, it will help your financial statement auditors. So it doesn't need to be perfect. It just means you can explain what it did and show the evidence, okay? Keeping it all in one place is very important. And then I was kind of leaning into talking about an independent review really gives the file credibility. So third-party review is useful only when the findings are actually tracked and corrected, right? So make sure you're defining the scope of the things that you're going to do around cybersecurity and your cybersecurity program. Make sure it's focused on what your risks actually are, and also in this instance, what the Department of Labor is going to want to see, right? Like, yes, you want to make sure you're being responsible you're thinking about cybersecurity critically, but also what is the Department of Labor actually going to want to see? So we're talking about, an auditor, SOC report, an assessment, scan, penetration test, tracking your findings. Again, the last thing you want to do is say, oh yeah, well, we found this problem. And then we just kind of like, that's not going to go over very well with an independent reviewer or the Department of Labor, right? So making sure that you've tracked the findings and responded to it. And then if needed, okay, we tested that point in time, we found the error, we think we've put a new control in place or we've done training. Now we need to make sure, what was our response actually effective? So don't leave it at just, okay, we put a new control in place. Make sure you go back and make sure that control is working or that the training was effective, right? So let's see here. Making sure I'm not missing anything out here. Okay. All right, let's talk about what it's really going to look like when you get that letter from the Department of Labor. So what we've understood from the inquiry and research we've done is that you get this inquiry letter from the Department of Labor. It can cover a whole host of things. What we're hearing is that recent inquiry letters in 2026, since the EBSA and the Department of Labor said cybersecurity is a top enforcement focus, is that 40% of what that letter is requesting is specific to cybersecurity. 40 out of the, so you've got 4 out of your, say there's 10 requests, information requests, 4 of them would be specific to cybersecurity. So the Department of Labor is wanting to see annual third-party audit of security controls as a recommended practice, and they would expect to see reports, supporting materials, appropriate standards, and documented correction of weaknesses. So making sure that you're using any independent work that is done to support and evidence the program, okay? So they want it in writing. If you did do testing, or if there's third-party audit reports, make sure those have been reviewed and responded to and documented. Vendor policies, contracts. So I know, when we're doing our benefit plan audits, we need to take a look at those vendor contracts, especially if participants are covering some of the cost of that subservice. We're required to make sure that the fees that the participants are being charged are reasonable, fair, in accordance with the contract. So make sure we're keeping those vendor contracts. If you're doing training for your internal and also potentially for specific to participants, make sure you're keeping a record of that, that the training has been done. And then again, talking about cyber insurance and incident response evidence. So those are some of the basic things that we know that they're going to ask for and want to see documentation of. And so making sure that, could you get that to them within 10 business days? That's again what we're hearing from other practitioners, is that you get that inquiry letter and you have 10 business days to respond. Could you do it? It gets really complex for a benefit plan because a normal business says, hey, this is our company, this is what we do, here's our operations, here's our processes. But then you sponsor a benefit plan and you say, wait, did we go through all of this for the benefit plan? And oh yeah, there's 4 different service providers. We outsource our payroll, we outsource the record keeping of the plan, we outsource the third-party administration plan of the plan, which is like your 5,500 preparation, your compliance testing for the year, your non-discrimination compliance testing, that's your TPA. Oh yeah, and there's also a custodian of the assets in the plan. That's another subservice provider to the plan. So 4 outside parties. Can you get all of those 4 outside parties to give you a solid response within 10 days? I'll tell you this, when we do audits and we request information from the record keeper to support some of our audit procedures, they tell us their turnaround window is 15 business days. Now, we're not their client, we don't pay them money, but still take that into consideration, that, those service providers, they might take some time to get you what you need. So don't be waiting until you get the letter to make sure you have what you should have. And it's like, maybe some people aren't nervous or afraid of the Department of Labor. Me personally, I am. I've seen when they have had administrative actions against plans and where there's no limitation of liability. And if you don't pay the assessed fee, they turn you over to the Department of Justice. So I don't mess with the Department of Labor. We make sure that we respond when they ask us to. They audit us sometimes too. So we love them. All right, here's our next poll. Oh, Cameron's pulling that up for everybody. How confident are you that your organization could assemble its employee benefit plan cybersecurity documentation within 10 business days? Okay, how confident are you? Very, somewhat, not very. We would depend heavily on service providers. We've never tested it. I am not sure what would be requested. Okay, then another 10 seconds. Five seconds. All right, we're gonna go ahead and close it.
That's really helpful.
All right, hey, 60% somewhat, but several departments would need to coordinate, and that's okay. You know it. That's great. A great place to at least be starting is maybe then you can divide and conquer, right? We would depend heavily on service providers, and I'm not sure what would be requested. Okay, so I think that's pretty reasonable as far as just having my finger on the pulse for the plan sponsors I work with on benefit plan audits, and why we really felt like this training was going to be a value add and be helpful for our clients and also those we work with in the benefit plan industry. Okay. All right. So what we want to talk about is, I get excited. Oh, I need this slide, my notes. Okay. All right. So if we wanted to do a live self-assessment of where you're at, specific to cybersecurity for your benefit plan, okay? Trying to hone in on that piece. Your overall cybersecurity of your company is very important, but we want to hone in on the benefit plan. So what we want to rate here is the actual evidence that you know you have, not how confident you are that these things are in place. Okay, what evidence do you actually have? Okay, so green means that you can locate the current evidence. You're good, you know you're ready to roll. Yellow is, well, it's partial, but I'm not sure who owns the evidence, okay? So partial evidence or you're not sure who owns it is yellow. And then red means missing or outdated documentation in one of these areas, okay? So I already know I talked about like insurance documentation and we're asking that plan sponsor, can you give us proof of coverage for that ERISA fidelity bond? And they can only find the original policy from 4 years ago and it hasn't been renewed or updated. That's a problem, right? So earlier, Cameron talked about doing this as a tabletop exercise, okay? And for me and what I've kind of been focused on, what if we tabletopped the SOC audit for all of your outsourced service providers for the plan? Do we have the SOC audit for the relevant year? Did someone actually read it, review it for their follow-ups? Okay, do that as a simple tabletop. So you're going to assign a coordinator, you're going to gather evidence, you're going to check consistency, and then create a remediation list. So try it for one thing, okay? The SOC report review as an example. But this should help you gauge where you're at and hopefully in a pretty straightforward manner, come up with some things that you need to improve, that you need to document something you've already been doing, or you need to get documentation in the file that it was clearly messy, okay? Should be straightforward, hopefully, and help you get everything in one place and find some areas where you need to improve. Okay, so another takeaway is, okay, gotten this really great information from Cameron. Diane's been talking to me a little bit about what's it really going to look like if the Department of Labor comes knocking. So what's some action? So your next 90 days should be really specific. Should be small documented steps And it should be looking towards prudent oversight. Do we have appropriate controls? Is there provider accountability and evidence? Okay, so days 1 through 30, we're just going to say, where are we at? What do we have? Okay, and who's in charge of it if we haven't assigned it in the past? Okay, so you're talking about the plan, the actual cybersecurity plan, looking at data flow, who are the providers that are involved, or who are the internal owners, and then the sponsor responsibilities, and then those outside service provider responsibilities. Okay, so just, I love making lists. This would be my favorite 30 days. Okay, then your next 31 to 60 days is assessing and prioritizing. Okay, so where do we have our largest gaps? What are our top 3 risks, right? Trying to stay intentional, trying to stay focused, making sure we're not biting off more than we can chew, and then we all fizzle out and nobody finishes what they're supposed to do. That never happens to me. So where are our biggest gaps? And from what I've understood is the biggest gap they're finding is around those outside service providers. And then making sure that there are owners for the remediation that needs to take place and that there's due dates. Okay. We're not, if we've gone through and assessed and prioritized, but we don't have solid understanding of who's responsible for it and when it needs to be done, again, we might kind of fizzle out in those next 30 days. Okay, then looking at the last 30 days, we're going to do what we can do with testing and documentation. Okay, so we should have our clear inventory. We should have what we should be focused on, what we need to accomplish by when, and then we need to make sure it's carried out. So do we get all our evidence in one place, right? That should be one of the goals of this 90-day exercise. Did we do a SOC audit review? Did we do a table exercise? And then has there been some management reporting, right? So a lot of times we see that our plan sponsors have a committee that's specifically charged with governance for the benefit plan. So is there some reporting to that committee? Maybe the reporting needs to be to the internal control officer or to the CEO. But making sure that that loop is closed and that you have support, right? You need top-down support to make sure that your change is really going to matter and that it's effective and in place, okay? So the next 90 days, you guys think that's doable? That not biting off more than you could chew? I will just say this. I know for some of our small plan sponsors, you might not have a full IT department. Maybe you're outsourcing some things there too. Just know here at Larson & Company, our service organization control audit team, they can help you better understand what are some of the gaps around our benefit plan and cybersecurity. It can help you understand that service organization control audit. Also, if you do have an IT person and you would like them to get in touch with us, that maybe we can help them better understand some of the aspects that are specific to a benefit plan, please feel free to reach out. We are more than happy to help. And you know, there's some things that we can and can't do just because if we're doing your benefit plan audit, we have to maintain our independence, but there's plenty of things that we can help you with, questions we can answer. So if you're feeling like you need a little bit more support or a little bit more direction, please feel free to reach out. We are happy to help any way that we can. Okay, with that, we just want to see if there were any questions. Nothing online. We did such a good job training everybody. Okay, well, I just want to tell everyone, thank you for being with us, participating today. We will make the slides available as well as those 2 handouts for a SOC audit review. And we will also get this training posted on our YouTube channel. So if you have a colleague that wasn't able to make it today, we can get them the link to the YouTube recording of this training as well. So thank you. Thanks for being here. Great. Thanks everyone online. Have a great day. All right.